Hi, good morning, everyone. This is a tough act to follow, although I promise I won't make anyone hug this morning. You've already done that. I'm here to talk about marketing trends, and it says 2018 there, but it should have been 2019. So there we are. But here are 4 marketing trends that I want to talk about. These are trends that we're seeing with the customers that are advertising on LinkedIn. So we work with all the largest B2B and a lot of B2C brands as well on our platform. And these are things that we're seeing them doing on LinkedIn, off LinkedIn, but it comes from this relationship that we have with them. And we do have a team of people who sit in New York, and all they do is think about marketing, which sounds like a pretty sweet gig. They talk a lot to our customers, they reflect a lot on what's happening, and they come up with these great ideas, and they really challenge what people think about marketing. They like to ask probing questions, they like to ask controversial questions about the things that all of us are taking for granted in terms of what is effective marketing. So I really enjoy the work that they're doing, and the way that they're looking at trends, and I'll explain a little bit the rationale behind it, is they like to call themselves the contrarian marketers. Now, this comes from the idea that you want to be doing what works. So you're not going to focus on what's wrong and consensus. So if an idea is bad and everyone agrees that idea is bad, that's not worth talking about. And if an idea is bad and there is some, some people think it's good, some people, it's also not worth talking about, because at the end of the day, that's a bad idea. So let's just focus on things that are right, things that work for brands. They don't want to talk about what's consensus. So if everyone thinks, yes, this is the way forward, we've seen this work, brands are doing this and it's amazing, great, let's just let them keep doing that. What's worth discussing is the things that we think are right, but people don't agree on it yet. So there is a lot of skepticism, or people don't quite understand, and that's where we're focusing our trends, is on the idea that these are things that we think are going to be the next big thing, but it isn't being widely done, but it is already being done by some brands. So we think these are trends that are actionable today. So we know of brands that are already doing this and doing it well. This isn't far in the future, blockchain, AI 2.0, this isn't something that isn't attainable right now. These are trends that we see in action. So I'll start with the first one, which we call the death of personas. I come from a marketing background as well. I did my BA in marketing. I did my master's in marketing, not satisfied with it, which is very wildly redundant. And it's really sad for me to see a stat like that when, this study by, was it InfoLab? It was Infolinks. Study that shows that only 3% of buyers think that advertising is relevant to them. It has a lot to do with personalization, and we've heard a lot about it today from GIFGAF, from the University of, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. We've heard that personalization really speaks to people. So why shouldn't it be the same when it comes to advertising? People feel like it should have been customer-centric, and an example of where this is working really well, where marketing really, really nails it, is Netflix. So if you think about the homepage on Netflix, it's not the same for me as it is for Stuart, as it is for Matt. It's a different one. Everyone has their own Netflix homepage. That's because they take every single data point they have about you and they make that as personalized as possible. It's the movies that you've watched, the things that you like, the things that you've started watching and then you kind of stopped watching straight away, the things that you've left on play and didn't really show them a sign that you were still alive. They take all that information in and they build what's going to be most relevant to you. So all the smallest even details, some that we don't even realize that they're taking into consideration. So for example, if you're someone who watches a lot of romantic comedies and they decide to show you a thumbnail for Good Will Hunting, the image that they're going to choose to present you that movie as an option of content that you're going to want to watch next is going to be of Matt Damon, Minnie Driver, sharing an intimate moment. Now, if you're someone who's more into comedy and all the data that they have shows that you've been watching comedy so far, they're going to choose a different thumbnail. that perhaps is going to speak to more to the comedic side of the movie. And so that's them really using that data, not guessing what you might like, but using that to inform what's going to make this person really want to look into this. And that's marketing. They're marketing this content to you so that you watch it next. Now, taking this back to the brands that we work with and how they're doing, they're informing their audiences, we still see a lot of guesswork happening. So people thinking about, my product is X, and the people who generally sign the deal at the end of the day is going to be the Sarah from sales, and someone from research might be involved in the process, in the buying committee. So there's a lot of thinking, but not a lot of data behind it. And the problem that we see when this happens is that sometimes people who are really material to the decisions, people who are big stakeholders, and this applies from B2B brands with an actual buying committee to B2C brands where it's actually a car and I really care about the opinion of my partner or someone else in my family or my friends, who knows. But it's really important that if you exclude them because you've come up with that idea already of who you think is in there, you're not reaching them with your marketing. So you're missing an integral piece of that chain of decision making. So the way we're addressing this with our brands, and this is not a sales pitch, this is free. Anyone can use this on LinkedIn. Any brand has access to this. Is a pixel that you put on your website, and it layers the data that we have on top of the visitors of your website. So we've implemented this many times with brands. Actually, anyone can implement this themselves. It's quite easy. But what it shows is who is actually going to your website, what they're doing, what do they care about. So in real life, where we've seen this work really well, for example, it was a telco brand, had their website completely divided by product. And with the aid of our pixel, they started to see that people from SMB companies were clicking on certain products and kind of going through that journey. And people from enterprise companies were going different route, different products, cared about different things. So they completely revamped their website to show, first, are you an SMB or are you an enterprise? And then all the content inside that was tailored to what they cared about. So obviously, this isn't like super real-time Netflix, we know everything you like. But it is more in the direction of, I've taken a minute to see who's actually doing what and who cares about what, and I'm tailoring the experience to what these people care about. So personalization is where we think things are going forward. We've heard a lot about it today, so it's good to see that we're not the only ones kind of seeing that as a great way to connect with people. The second trend I want to talk about is the originality delusion. I've had experiences in agencies, I've worked in a few of them, and this is really all over the place. Everyone loves something that's never been done before, never been heard before, no one has ever thought of this, and we want to do this because it's new. But what we're seeing that is new isn't necessarily what sells. People don't care as much about new. So I'll give the example of Tropicana, which is an American orange juice old brand, I think. It's been around for a while. So in 2009, they decided they were going to spend $35 million on completely revamping their package and pushing that out to market, doing a rebrand, making sure people were aware of the rebrand. So they came up with this new packaging that was quite modern, kind of showcases the product in a different way. And that was all done by an agency called Arnett, which is no longer in business because they've lost 20% of their sales because of this. It's completely crashed. It was very much a car crash. And what happened is that while they were going through this, their customers, they couldn't see on the shelves anymore the product that they recognized. So that was a great opportunity for their competition to kind of go in and grab some market share, because it kind of opened up the conversation all over again. You were so used to just going into the shop and grabbing that Tropicana package that you were really accustomed to. Suddenly you don't find it, you're like, oh, well, then maybe I'll try this organic new one from so-and-so who has never tried before. So they lost customers, they lost sales, and about a month and a half later, they reverted back to the package. All in all, they lost about 50 million. So it was just terrible all around. And when we see something similar as well in marketing. So there's this study by The Drum which showed that only 1 in 5 new ad campaigns outperform old campaigns. So every time we're trying to reinvent the wheel, every time we're gonna just do a different campaign this month because we have a different budget for it and let's not do the same as before, we're not seeing that work super well. So the way we've been working with our customers, and this goes across their entire strategy for all publishers, is more around having always-on communications, making sure that you're not popping up on your clients' timelines and in their lives like once a month when you need something. You have something to promote, you have a webinar. Hi, can you please sign up for my webinar? That doesn't work. It works to be always on, always talking, always interacting, and then when you do have something to push, then you push it a little bit more, and people are used to your presence at that point. But most importantly, it gives you a chance to be consistent and see what works and what doesn't work, and then pull back on the things that are not working, and then really invest on the things that are working well. If you start and stop and start and stop, it doesn't give you that data to actually be able to see what works and what doesn't work. But more important than something being new, what we found out is what really sells is relevance. So this is a study that we did with Edelman in partnership, and we asked, we were talking about content marketing, and we asked, when we think about C-suite, because C-suite is the audience that everyone loves on our side. Everyone wants to talk to C-suite. So we're like, okay, what do you want from thought leadership? If you're going to be reading about something that a brand is talking about, what do you want? Do you want something that's new or something that's relevant? They all want relevant. They all want to read about the things that they care about, that solve the problems that they have, that add value to the things, the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day in their organizations. They don't want to hear about something that's new just because of the sake of something being new. And that's 2 times more important to them for something to be relevant than for something to be new. So if we go back to the Tropicana example, what they did, this is Raymond Louis, one of the designers from the Mad Men era, he designed the Shell logo, and he used to say, don't sell original, sell Maya. Maya is most advanced, yet acceptable. So his idea was that we need to push boundaries, but we need to push them just as far enough as people can stay with us on that journey. Because if we push it too far, we'll lose people along. And that's what happened with Tropicana. They kind of just went all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and their customers were left there just being like, what just happened? So they had to pull it back a little bit. And so what they did was they went back to the old logo, they went back to a recognizable packaging, but still innovated in having it in a different way where you can see the product now, you couldn't before. So, and that kind of got them back on track. So when we look at content marketing and how you can do that over time, I like this example of Marketo. They have this definitive guide to lead generation. It's been 8 consecutive years as their top source of ROI, that piece of content. What they do is over time, they just renew it. They make sure that it's up to date and they've got new things to say, but they stick to that topic because they know that customers are looking for it and they want to hear about it. It's important for them. There's a big overlap between people who might become their customers and people who care about lead generation. They found that sweet spot. So they're not going to talk about something different. They're not going to talk tomorrow about garden furniture because that doesn't really sit well with their customers. It's lead generation that works for them. They stick with it. They don't try to talk about every marketing topic under the sun. They know what works. So that's a good tip that we think is important, is to really find your niche, find the thing that your company has the most value to talk about and that resonates with your customer, and double down on it. Instead of just trying to talk about every possible thing that your customer may or may not care about, find what it is that they care and become the thought leader on it. Which is a good segue to our next trend, which is also to do with content marketing. So blockbuster marketing is another trend that we're seeing. And so real-time marketing, we think, is the worst idea in our industry. And now, before I get heckled by GIFGAF, stay with me. I will explain exactly the difference between the two. So this is a tweet from Oreo from the 2013 Super Bowl. So Super Bowl, the lights went out. It was half an hour, the game had to be interrupted. And you know how expensive the ads are on Super Bowl. People are waiting to see their ads and everything. People care a lot of buzz. And what Oreo did is they took it to Twitter, and this is 2013, so this is like earlier days of all of this. And they tweeted this: "You can still dunk in the dark." It went viral, kinda. It went pretty viral. But the day after, all the trade magazines, like the marketing publications, were like lauding it, like it was the most brilliant thing that was ever done. It was like, oh, Oreo won the Super Bowl. It was amazing what they did, and it was pretty innovative. But let's analyze what happened here. So they had a newsroom of 15 people just waiting for something to happen so they could jump on that moment. So that's what we mean about the real-time marketing here, is this idea that just having a team, they had a copywriter, they had designers, they had everyone sitting in a room just waiting what was going to happen and how can we, I think they coined it as like newsjacking. So something happens and then you hijack it with your brand. And it was great for this one time, but then it kind of created this trend where brands were bandwagoning on it, and it became too much to handle, every brand trying to be smart and witty at the same time, and it started alienating customers. So different than, and I'll give the example of GIFGAF again, because it's different, because what you do is you elevate your customers and you let them be the voice of the brand. So this tweet actually could have come from someone who really loves Oreo. They just needed to have a team moderating there and finding, the smart things that everyone was saying and how people were hijacking that situation and just elevate it, right? But they had an entire team. They put money behind having people thinking of ideas of how they could be viral. And that's where the difference lies. Did it result in people buying more cookies? No evidence to show that. No evidence to show that. It did result in a lot of brands copying that model like crazy. So there are now lots of brands who have this newspaper model, newsrooms, who just want to push content that's relevant and try and piggyback on news so that they are always relevant and they're pushing content. But it's really time-consuming, resource-consuming, and there is a question of whether you can get your value for money when you invest on this. Because when you think about the newspaper model, it's been in decline. It's not the way people are consuming content so much these days as they were a couple of years ago. So where we found brands having success is more with the Hollywood model, which is franchises. And when you think about Disney, they've really perfected this. They find a franchise that works, and then they just run with it. They make Star Wars every December. Everyone knows what the story is about. Everyone knows the universe. They just have a new story within the universe, and it sells. It sells because people like familiarity. They like the stories that they know. If you're not convinced, they are telling fewer stories as well. So they are releasing less movies, and those movies are all of mostly stories that we know. So if you look at the last 3 years of releases from Disney, the majority of them are stories that are being rehashed, even from comic books or from universes we're already familiar with. But there are a few new stories in there as well, because they need to start, planting the seeds for the future. Maybe one of these is going to be the next franchise, but they're not going to invest on having 15 different, completely unrelated stories that we're not familiar with. It's a lot for us to take in, as it turns out. So this model in which you find a universe that people enjoy and you build on it and you continue releasing movies or content around it works really well. Same with marketing. So you've got the internet trends from Mary Meeker. She releases this report every year, and everyone in marketing and media waits for it to see what's happening with the internet. And You can call that a franchise because it's predictable. You know exactly what's going to be in there. You know it's going to be updated. You know it's going to be the latest of this past year, but you know the format. The format is always the same. That's her franchise. Salesforce also has a franchise they call the State of. So they release this industry insights. They have the state of analytics, the state of sales, the state of service. They know that that format works for them. They just adapt it for the different verticals, and people know what to expect. So people start to associate that with a brand. They start to associate, you know, if I want some insights from service, I know Salesforce will have that report, and I know what's going to be in it. Familiarity really works. And we also have ours. We have the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide. We launched this in 2015. And we've made it into webinars, into blog posts, into infographics, into podcasts. There's a book, there's a magazine. You know, you just take that big rock and you break it down into different formats that you can have other ways to reach your audience in different ways, however they want to consume it. But it's all within this overarching franchise that people understand and know what to expect. So sometimes I go out and I talk to some of our brands, and they know off the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide. They ask me, you know, when is it going to be the next magazine, and when are we going to have another podcast episode? They do ask me that, and I'm like, wow, that's insane that, you know, people understand this because it's been hammered for so long. We've been publishing under that umbrella that it becomes recognizable. It's repetition over time. And even this own presentation is also becoming a franchise. This is now the 2019 version, but we've been doing it since, and we're always coming up with the new trends and refreshing this presentation. And it's become a fan favorite, basically. Last trend before I'll pass it to the next presenter is you are what you signal. So when we look at these two advertisements, I think this question is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I think we could all agree it's this one. The Apple one looks a lot more expensive than the Motorola one. And our brains, they really like shortcuts. They don't like to think a lot. They just like to look at things and understand what it is and move on with their lives. So when we look at something that looks expensive, our brain just go like, yeah, that's probably like a good product and expensive. Otherwise, how would they have money to even put an advertisement there? So there must be something there. That's the message that we internalize. And this is actually backed by a bit more science, which is the idea of signaling. So it's the idea that it's not so much about the message, it's also about the medium. You can't disassociate the two. So if I am saying something in a very expensive looking billboard, there is no way for me to differentiate the fact that that billboard is expensive and what's being said in it. Actually, the other way around would work as well. If I put a very, very expensive ad in what looks like a cheap place, my brain would probably just go straight to cheap. It would completely disregard the message in itself. It would just take the context around it. And this is why Apple, they buy these billboards for 5-10 years. They don't even know what they're going to put there yet, but they know they want that space because they're a luxury company. They're not a tech company. That's why they have, stores in the Fifth Avenue, because that's what they're signaling to their public is like, this is why you're paying a premium for my technology. Technology is becoming a commodity, but we are a luxury company, and this is a status symbol that you're going to have with you. So I need to be in the places that generally, are reserved for Prada and Cartier and et cetera. So people start putting me in that category. Now, transposing that to media, and I've been in this industry for longer than it looks. Generally, when you talk to agency, there is this idea that people want to be perceived as, I want to be perceived as premium. I want to be seen as high quality, but I want to pay as little as possible as I can, and I want to have a massive reach with it as well. You can't have both. It's impossible to have both. But so this is an example from Chase, and they were running advertisement. They really got into this idea that, we can just run everywhere because it's quite cheap. So they were running on 400,000 sites, and sometime someone asked, is this really effective? Are we getting ROI from being on so many places at the same time in front of our customer, or can we do a test? So they decided to create a whitelist and say, you know what, let's cull it down to these 5,000 sites where we think there is an affinity with our brand, see what happens. They had the same results, which goes to show that there was a lot of waste going on. So we're hearing more and more brands talk about context, where they're at, when does it make sense to be in a conversation with your customers, and in which places. So all those things in maybe 3 or 4 years ago was more like, you know, we can and it's cheap, let's do it. Right now, people are kind of pulling back a little bit and making sure that their brand is in places that are context relevant and they're not interrupting the journey of your customer, of your client, as they are going through their day-to-day on the web. Great. So summarize what we talked today. First of all, this is what we're seeing brands do, and if you could do that for your brand, probably you'd see some benefits, is the idea of building dynamic personas using your first-party data. No one knows more about what your customers care about and what they do than you. You interact with them. Use that to inform how you show up to that conversation with them, how you present your products, how do they reach them. Second is appreciating the idea that sometimes old ideas outperform new ideas. Sometimes what's worked in the past has worked for a reason, and you can possibly build on it to do things better in the future than just coming up with something that's new for the sake of it. Next, try and develop some repeatable franchises to break through the noise. There is more content marketing out there than anyone can possibly consume. How do you break through it? Is by figuring out what those people, those personas that you've defined, what do they care about? What problems are they facing? How can you add value? How can you help them solve those challenges? And just talk about that. Make sure that they can recognize the way you talk about things, and they'll come back to you for advice on that particular topic and start seeing your brand as the thought leader on it. And lastly, make sure you're reaching those audiences in premium context. And premium can mean different things for different audiences. Premium for me is the places where those people will be more willing to listen to you and they feel it's appropriate for your brand to be there. Different brands will have different premium places. It's not necessarily the most expensive billboard on the airport. It can be the place where you think you're going to make the most impact and your customer is going to be willing to hear what you have to say. That's it for me. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Bruna. I'm sure we're all now thinking of our Netflix homepages and what exactly it says about us. And we've got time for one quick question for Bruna, if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask. One thing that I noted, you spoke about context a lot today. Earlier on, we've spoken about kind of content and what makes content fly. So, you know, in terms of content versus context, kind of is it a trade-off? Is one more powerful than the other? How do you get that balance between both?
I would say content will always be the most important, because if you don't have the right content, it doesn't matter whether you are in a place where people will be willing to hear you and will be noticing you or not. Mm-hmm. So you want to be, obviously, if you can have both at the same time, that's the best possible scenario, because you have the right message at the right place, mm-hmm. and you know that's where magic happens. But if you want to get just one of those two right, it's probably content.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. Please join me in thanking Bruna this morning.